Hello there. Tonight we'll drift back in time to the sun-drenched highlands of Ethiopia, to a place of towering stone monuments and whispered legends. We'll journey to the heart of a forgotten African empire, a Christian kingdom that stood as a crossroads between Rome and India. How could such a powerful kingdom, a beacon of faith and trade, simply fade into the whispers of the mountains? And so our quiet journey begins, not in the heart of a city, but on the long, winding paths that were its lifeblood. Imagine, if you will, a world stitched together by threads of dust and desire, a tapestry woven across deserts and mountains, connecting empires that barely knew each other's true names. These were the ancient trade routes, the arteries of the old world, and the Kingdom of Aksum was positioned at its very heart, a vital, beating nexus between the Mediterranean Sea and the distant, spice-laden shores of India. It's a thought that can quiet the mind, isn't it? The sheer scale of it, the silent, patient movement of people and their dreams across a vast, unforgiving landscape, all happening centuries and centuries ago. Let your mind drift and picture the scene. A caravan moves slowly, a silhouette against a crimson dawn in the Ethiopian highlands. The air is cool and thin, carrying the scent of dry earth and the distant promise of the sea. The gentle, rhythmic padding of camels' feet on the dusty track is the only sound, a soft percussion for the slow, unfurling day. These weren't just merchants, they were adventurers, diplomats and dreamers, their lives bound to the seasons and the well-trodden paths that promised wealth, knowledge, and perhaps a glimpse of a world beyond their own. They carried goods that were the stuff of legend in the bustling markets of Rome, frankincense and myrrh, resins that burned in temples and palaces, their fragrant smoke thought to carry prayers to the heavens. These fragrant resins, harvested from thorny trees in the arid lands of southern Arabia and the Horn of Africa, were more precious than gold to the Romans. They were the scent of piety, of power, of the sacred. The Aksumites, with their strategic location, became the masterful curators of this trade. They didn't just facilitate it, they controlled it, their ports and cities acting as the essential intermediaries where East met West. It was as if Aksum held the key to a fragrant lock, and the entire Roman world was willing to pay dearly for it. The caravans arriving in Aksum's territory would have been a sight to behold, laden with these treasures, their handlers weary, but filled with the anticipation of reaching the bustling port of Agilis. This port, nestled on the Red Sea coast, was a kaleidoscope of cultures. Imagine the sounds, the lilting cadence of the local Gez language mingling with the harsher tones of Greek, the soft whispers of Aramaic, and the melodic dialects of traders from the Indian subcontinent. The air would have been thick with the smells of salt, fish, exotic spices like cinnamon and pepper, and of course, the ever-present sacred aroma of incense. Here, Roman ships with their broad purple sails would have docked alongside the more slender, swift dhows that had navigated the monsoon winds across the Indian Ocean. It was a place of exchange, not just of goods, but of ideas, philosophies, and faiths, a melting pot where the world's currents swirled together. From India came shimmering silks, precious gemstones, and spices that could transform a simple meal into a feast fit for an emperor. From the heart of Africa, a different kind of wealth flowed through Aksum. Ivory, gleaming white and cool to the touch, hunted in the vast savannas to the south, rhinoceros horn, believed to have medicinal properties, and gold, panned from riverbeds or mined from deep within the earth. Aksum was the funnel through which this immense natural wealth of Africa was introduced to the classical world. In return, the Roman Empire sent its own manufactured goods, fine glassware, lustrous pottery, wine from the vineyards of Gaul and Italy, and textiles of intricate design. It was a delicate and complex dance of commerce, a global network pulsating with life long before our modern age. This vast network required immense sophistication. It wasn't a simple matter of bartering on a beach. The Kingdom of Aksum developed a complex system of taxation, regulation, and protection to ensure the smooth flow of this river of wealth. They understood logistics, building way stations, and guarding the perilous routes through the mountains. They understood diplomacy, forging alliances and treaties with the desert tribes who controlled the inland routes. And they understood value, eventually minting their own currency, a powerful statement of their sovereignty and their central role in this global economy. This intricate web of connections fostered a unique cosmopolitan culture within Aksum, a kingdom that looked both outward to the wider world and inward to its own rich African heritage, creating something entirely new and powerful in the process. And as we rest here, in the quiet of our own time, we can almost hear the faint, ghostly echo of those caravans, a whisper on the wind telling of a forgotten empire built on the fragrant dreams of the ancient world. The flow of these goods was like the slow, steady breathing of the earth itself, an inhalation of exotic wonders from the east and an exhalation of African treasures to the west. The routes themselves were characters in this story, each with its own personality. Some were maritime, relying on the predictable genius of the monsoon winds, a celestial clockwork that sailors learned to trust with their lives. Ships would leave the Egyptian ports of the Red Sea, sail down past the Aksumite coast, and then, catching the seasonal winds, make the long arcing journey across the open ocean to the Malabar coast of India. The return journey was just as dependent on this natural rhythm, a testament to humanity's ability to listen to the planet and move in harmony with its cycles. Then there were the land routes, the incense roads of legend, which were arguably even more arduous. These paths cut through some of the world's most dramatic and challenging landscapes. They wound through scorching deserts, where the sun beat down relentlessly, and the horizon shimmered with mirages. They climbed into the cool, sharp air of the Ethiopian highlands, navigating treacherous mountain passes, where a single misstep could be disastrous. Along these routes, life-giving oases were the true jewels, places of rest and replenishment. Their locations passed down through generations of travelers like sacred knowledge. These journeys could take months, a slow, deliberate pilgrimage of commerce that tested the endurance of both man and beast. Imagine the social fabric of such a caravan. It was a moving community, a temporary society of diverse individuals, bound by a common purpose and shared vulnerability. There were the wealthy merchants, of course, but also the skilled camel drivers, who knew the desert's secrets, the armed guards who protected the precious cargo from bandits, the storytellers who passed the long nights with tales of jinn and distant kings, and the navigators who read the stars as if they were a map. They shared food, water, and stories under the vast, silent canopy of the desert sky. This shared experience must have forged a unique kind of bond, a fraternity of the road that transcended language, ethnicity, and creed. The economic impact on Aksum was, of course, transformative. This constant flow of wealth fueled the rise of a powerful elite, a monarchy that could afford to fund monumental construction projects, field a formidable army, and project its power far beyond its borders. The capital city, also named Aksum, became a dazzling metropolis, its markets filled with goods from 3 continents. It was a city where one could see Roman amphorae used to store local honey wine, wear silk from China, and adorn oneself with gold from the Nubian mines. This wasn't a remote, isolated kingdom. It was a global player, a sophisticated urban society that stood as an equal to the other great powers of its time. But the trade was more than just economic. It was a conduit for culture. Ideas traveled with the caravans, carried in the minds of merchants, missionaries, and artisans. New technologies, artistic styles, and religious beliefs found fertile ground in Aksum's cosmopolitan environment. The kingdom was a sponge, absorbing influences from the Hellenistic world of the Eastern Mediterranean, from the ancient traditions of southern Arabia, and from the distant philosophies of India. Yet it never lost its own distinct identity. It blended these external influences with its deep-rooted African traditions to create a civilization that was uniquely and powerfully its own, a testament to the creative power that emerges when cultures meet and mingle in peace and commerce. This legacy, born on the dusty incense roads, would shape the destiny of the entire region for 1,000 years to come. From those dusty inland trails, our journey now drifts towards the coast, towards the sound of lapping waves and the scent of salt on the wind. The vast trade network we've just imagined wasn't sustained by land alone. Its reach, its power, and its rhythm were ultimately dictated by the sea. The Kingdom of Aksum was not just a gatekeeper of land routes. It was a formidable maritime power, the gentle master of the Red Sea and the western reaches of the Indian Ocean. This naval prowess was the other lung of the empire, breathing in the wealth of the sea lanes, just as the caravans breathed in the treasures of the land. Let your thoughts settle on the port city of Adulis. See it not as a mere dot on a map, but as a vibrant, living entity. The harbor is a forest of masts, the timbers of ships from Alexandria, Persia, and Yemen, rocking gently in the turquoise water. The sun is warm on the stone quays, where stevedores, their skin glistening with sweat, hoist heavy crates and smooth, weighty elephant tusks. The air hums with 1,000 conversations, a symphony of commerce and negotiation. This city was Aksum's window to the world, and its fleet was the key that opened it. Without control of these waters, Aksum would have been a highland kingdom, wealthy perhaps, but isolated. With it, it became an empire. The ships of Aksum were a testament to the ingenuity of their builders. They were not the heavy, square-rigged galleons of later European powers. Instead, they were likely more akin to the dhows that still grace these waters today, with their characteristic triangular, or lateen sails. These sails were a marvel of maritime technology, allowing ships to sail much closer to the wind, making them more maneuverable and less dependent on having the wind directly behind them. This gave Aksumite sailors a crucial advantage in the often tricky winds of the Red Sea. With its narrow straits and coastal breezes, they could navigate with a precision and flexibility that was the envy of their rivals. Imagine the feel of one of these vessels slicing through the water, the creak of the wooden hull, the snap of the sail as it catches the wind, the call of the captain directing his crew. These sailors were masters of their environment. They knew the patterns of the tides, the locations of treacherous reefs, and the safe anchorages along the long, arid coastlines of Africa and Arabia. They navigated by the sun and the stars, using an intimate knowledge of the cosmos passed down through generations. They were part of a long and storied tradition of Red Sea seafaring, a lineage of mariners who had plied these waters since the time of the pharaohs. Aksum's naval power wasn't just for commerce, it was also a tool of statecraft. The king could project his military might across the sea, a capacity that few other powers in the region possessed. Historical accounts, such as the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a Roman-era guide to the Red Sea and Indian Ocean trade, speak of Aksum's authority over the coastal regions. The Aksumite navy could protect its merchant ships from piracy, a constant threat in ancient waters, ensuring that the vital flow of goods was not interrupted. It could also be used to enforce treaties, collect tribute from vassal states along the coast, and even launch amphibious invasions. One of the most significant examples of this power was Aksum's military intervention across the Red Sea in what is now Yemen. The kingdoms of southern Arabia were ancient and wealthy, but often politically fragmented. Aksum, under powerful kings like Caleb in the 6th century, saw both an opportunity and a threat in the region. When a local ruler began persecuting the Christian population of Najran, the Byzantine Emperor, a fellow Christian monarch, looked to Aksum for help. King Caleb responded by assembling a massive fleet, a naval armada that transported an entire army across the sea. This was a logistical feat of incredible complexity, requiring thousands of sailors, soldiers, and hundreds of ships. The successful invasion and subsequent occupation of parts of southern Arabia demonstrated that Aksum's power was not confined to Africa. It was a true regional superpower, capable of shaping events on both sides of the Red Sea. This control of the sea lanes cemented Aksum's crucial role as the middleman between the Roman-Byzantine world and the Far East. The Romans much preferred to trade through Aksumite ports, rather than the overland routes that passed through their perennial rivals, the Persian Empire. By sailing the Red Sea and entrusting their goods to Aksumite merchants, they could bypass Persian taxes and political instability. This made Aksum a strategic partner, an indispensable ally to the most powerful empire in the West. This relationship brought not only wealth, but also immense prestige and security to the Aksumite kingdom. The rhythm of the port at Odalis would have been governed by the monsoons. There were periods of intense activity when the fleets arrived from India, their holds filled with silks, spices, and pepper. The markets would have been flooded with goods, and the city would have pulsed with energy. Then there were quieter times, as merchants waited for the winds to shift again, a period for repairing ships, planning future voyages, and solidifying trade agreements. This cyclical pattern, dictated by nature itself, would have been woven into the very fabric of life in coastal Aksum. It was a life of patience, of understanding the larger forces of the world, and of knowing the right moment to act. This deep connection to the sea also shaped the Aksumite worldview. They were not an insular mountain people. They were cosmopolitan, outward-looking, and keenly aware of the complex political and economic currents of the wider world. Their kings received ambassadors from distant lands, and their merchants brought back stories of Rome's grandeur and India's mysteries. This constant influx of new information and ideas kept Aksumite society dynamic and adaptable. Their mastery of the Red Sea was more than a commercial or military advantage. It was a fundamental part of their identity, the source of their worldly sophistication and their enduring power. As the sun sets over the imagined harbor of Adulis, we can picture the last of the ships returning, their sails like dark wings against the golden water, secure in the knowledge that they were home, in a kingdom that ruled the waves. As the echoes of the sea fade, our focus turns inward, away from the bustling ports, and toward the source of the immense wealth that funded those fleets and built a kingdom. What was it that the world desired so deeply from Aksum? What treasures did this corner of Africa hold, that great empires would send their ships and caravans across half the world to acquire? The answer lies deep within the earth, and in the vast, untamed wildernesses that stretched south of the Aksumite heartland. The kingdom's prosperity was built upon the trade of ivory and gold, materials that have captivated human imagination for millennia. Let's first consider ivory, often called white gold. Imagine the profound silence of the African savanna, broken only by the buzz of insects and the distant call of a bird. Here herds of elephants, magnificent and ancient creatures, roamed freely. To the Aksumites, and to the cultures they traded with, the tusks of these animals were a substance of almost mystical beauty. Its creamy, luminous quality, its smoothness, and its unique density made it one of the most prized luxury materials in the ancient world. It was a substance that felt both alive and eternal, a perfect medium for expressing power, piety, and artistic beauty. The journey of an elephant tusk from the savannah to a Roman workshop was a long and arduous one. It began with skilled hunters, men who understood the ways of the elephant and the unforgiving nature of the wilderness. These were not Aksumites themselves, but more likely peoples from further south, from whom the Aksumites traded. They would bring the raw tusks to border markets, great seasonal gatherings where the goods of the interior were exchanged. Here Aksumite merchants, agents of the king or wealthy trading families, would inspect the ivory, judging its quality, its size and its color. The largest and most flawless tusks were immensely valuable, destined for the grandest of purposes. From these frontier markets, the ivory was transported north, likely by mule or camel, on a long trek to the capital city of Aksum, or directly to the port of Adulis. In the hands of Aksumite artisans, some of this ivory was carved into exquisite local objects, delicate combs, decorative inlays for furniture, or ceremonial items for the royal court. But the vast majority was destined for export. Packed carefully to prevent cracking or chipping, the tusks would be loaded into the holds of ships, ready for their journey across the sea. Once they reached the workshops of Alexandria, Antioch, or Rome itself, they were transformed by master craftsmen. They became the keys of ornate musical instruments, the faces of religious icons, the ceremonial chairs of consuls, and the intricate game pieces used by the Roman elite. Holding an object of ivory was to hold a piece of exotic, faraway Africa, a symbol of immense wealth and worldly connection. Then there was gold. If ivory was the symbol of exotic beauty, gold was the very substance of power. It is an element that doesn't tarnish, a metal that glitters with the light of the sun itself. The Ethiopian highlands and the lands bordering them were rich in gold, found as fine dust in riverbeds, or in veins of quartz deep underground. The acquisition of this gold was a labor-intensive process, relying on the hard work of countless individuals. Imagine people standing for hours in the shallows of a river, patiently swirling sand and gravel in a shallow pan, their eyes keenly watching for the telltale glint of a tiny golden flake. Others worked in mines, tunneling into the earth with simple tools, following the quartz veins in the dim, flickering light of oil lamps. It was dangerous, back-breaking work. But its reward was the raw material of empire. The raw gold, once collected, was melted down and refined, its impurities burned away until only the pure, glowing metal remained. It was then cast into standardized bars or ingots for trade, or, more importantly, delivered to the royal mint. The Aksumite kings understood the profound psychological and economic power of this metal. It was tangible, it was universally desired, and it allowed them to project their authority in a way that was understood by all. The combined trade in ivory and gold created a river of wealth that flowed into the royal coffers. This immense revenue is what allowed the Aksumite state to function on such a grand scale. It paid for the professional army that guarded the trade routes and defended the kingdom's borders. It funded the navy that patrolled the Red Sea. It financed the ambitious public works projects, the palaces, the dams, and the magnificent monuments that came to define Aksumite civilization. And it provided the capital for the kingdom's elite to live in a style of considerable luxury, creating a market for the very imported goods that their own exports helped to pay for. This trade, however, was a double-edged sword. Aksum's economy was heavily reliant on these two commodities, and on the continued demand for them in the Roman world. As long as the Roman Empire was stable and prosperous, Aksum thrived. But this dependence made the kingdom vulnerable to economic shifts far beyond its control. It was a grand and glorious enterprise, but its foundations were, in a way, as delicate as a carved piece of ivory and as susceptible to external pressures as the fluctuating price of gold. The wealth was real, and it built a magnificent kingdom, but the story of that kingdom's later fortunes would be inextricably linked to the fortunes of its distant trading partners, and the continued global appetite for these gilded tears of the earth. For now, though, let's just rest in the image of that immense wealth. Picture the royal treasuries in the city of Aksum, cool, dark chambers filled with the soft gleam of stacked gold bars and the pale, ghostly luminescence of countless elephant tusks. This was the silent, solid representation of the kingdom's power. It was a treasure hoard gathered from the mountains and forests, won through shrewd trade and mastery of the sea. It was the fuel for a golden age, a tangible link between the raw, wild heart of Africa and the sophisticated, consuming desires of the classical world. This silent, glittering hoard was the foundation upon which a great civilization was built, a testament to Aksum's ability to harness the natural wealth of its land and transform it into international power and prestige. The river of gold and ivory we've been imagining was not just a chaotic flood of raw materials. Great kingdoms require order, systems, and a way to measure and express their wealth and authority. As Aksum grew from a regional power into a true commercial empire, its rulers took a momentous step, one that would broadcast their sovereignty across the known world. They began to mint their own coins. This wasn't just an economic convenience, it was a profound political statement, a way of stamping their identity onto the very medium of exchange. Each small, precious disc of metal was a miniature proclamation of power, a portrait of a king, and a piece of propaganda that could travel farther than any army. Let's allow our minds to drift into the quiet, focused atmosphere of the royal mint in Aksum. The air would be filled with the rhythmic sound of hammering, a sharp, metallic clang that was the heartbeat of the kingdom's economy. You would smell the heat of the forge, where gold and silver were melted in clay crucibles, until they glowed like captured stars. Skilled metallurgists would carefully mix the alloys, ensuring the purity and weight of each batch met the exacting royal standard. The molten metal would then be poured into molds to create small blank discs called flans. These were the blank canvases upon which history would be written. Once cooled, these blanks were taken to the engravers. Imagine a master artisan, his face etched with concentration, leaning over a bronze or iron die. With tiny, sharp tools, he painstakingly carves a mirror image of the king's portrait into the metal. He captures not just a likeness, but an idealized image of power and divine favor, the noble profile, the elaborate crown or headcloth, the symbols of his authority. On another die, he carves the reverse side of the coin, perhaps a symbol of the kingdom, like the crescent and disc of the pre-Christian era, or later, the powerful image of the cross. Every detail is precise, for these dies will be used to strike thousands of coins, each one a perfect replica of his art. Then came the final forceful act of creation. A blank flan was placed between the two dies. A powerful striker, a man of great strength and precision, would bring a heavy hammer down with a single sharp blow. Clang! In that instant of immense pressure, the soft gold or silver was forced into every minute detail of the carvings. The blank disc was transformed. It now bore the face of the king, the symbols of his kingdom, and inscriptions in Greek or the local Ge'ez script. It was no longer just a piece of metal. It was now money. It was Aksumite currency, a tangible piece of the king's authority that one could hold in the palm of their hand. The Aksumite coinage is remarkable for several reasons. Aksum was one of the very few states in Africa, besides Egypt and Carthage, to issue its own coins in antiquity, and the only one in sub-Saharan Africa. This places it in an elite club of kingdoms, alongside Rome, Persia, and the Kushan Empire in India. The coins were issued in gold, silver, and bronze, creating a sophisticated trimetallic system that could facilitate transactions of all sizes, from a farmer buying grain in a local market to a merchant settling a massive international trade deal. The gold coins in particular were used for this large-scale international trade, and their weight was carefully calibrated to align with the standards of the Roman Empire, making them easily accepted in foreign ports. What's truly fascinating is the story these coins tell over the centuries. The earliest Aksumite coins from around the late 3rd century AD feature the king's portrait and pagan symbols, the crescent and disc, representing older South Arabian deities. The inscriptions are in Greek, the international language of trade and diplomacy in the Eastern Mediterranean. This shows us an Aksum that is confident, powerful, and deeply integrated into the Hellenistic world. These coins were designed to be understood and respected by their primary trading partners, the Romans. They say, "We are a kingdom like you, we understand your rules, we are a power to be reckoned with." Then, in the 4th century, a dramatic change occurs. Under the reign of King Ezana, the symbols on the coinage are transformed. The pagan crescent and disc vanish, and in their place appears the cross. This is one of the most powerful and tangible pieces of evidence we have for the kingdom's conversion to Christianity. King Ezana was one of the first rulers in the entire world to put the cross on his coins, even before many Roman emperors did so consistently. Imagine the impact of this: a Roman merchant in the port of Adulis, or even Alexandria, receiving a gold coin from Aksum and seeing the familiar sacred symbol of his own new faith. It was a message that transcended commerce. It was a declaration of shared belief, a statement of alliance in a world undergoing profound religious change. Later coins even show the evolution of the language. While Greek remained on the gold coins intended for international trade, inscriptions in the indigenous Stelae script began to appear on the silver and bronze coins meant for local circulation. We see powerful mottos like, "By the grace of God," or "May this please the people." These coins were speaking directly to the Aksumite population, reinforcing the king's authority, not just as a commercial leader, but as a divinely sanctioned Christian ruler of his own people. They become a window into the kingdom's soul, reflecting its changing faith and growing sense of a unique national identity. So, as you rest, picture one of these small, precious objects. Feel its cool, satisfying weight in your hand. Trace the faint, worn outline of a king's face, a monarch who lived and ruled more than 1600 years ago. This tiny piece of metal has survived the fall of empires. It has lain buried in the earth for centuries, a silent witness to a forgotten golden age. It's more than just money. It's a portrait, a headline, and a testament to a time when an African kingdom stood proudly on the world stage, stamping its story in gold and silver for all to see. From the intricate handheld world of coins, our journey now expands its focus, lifting our gaze from the palm of the hand to the vast open sky. We move from the symbols of economic power to the most dramatic and enduring symbols of Aksumite ambition and spiritual belief, the towering obelisks or stelae that still dominate the landscape of the ancient capital. These are not just pillars of stone, they are profound statements, monolithic prayers, and magnificent feats of engineering that defy our modern understanding. They are the silent, stone sentinels of a lost kingdom, and their story is one of immense power, faith, and mystery. Let your mind travel to the main stelae field in the city of Aksum. The air is warm, and the sun is high, casting long, sharp shadows from these colossal structures. Some stand tall and proud, seeming to pierce the brilliant blue of the Ethiopian sky. Others lie broken, toppled by time or cataclysm, their immense fragments resting on the earth like sleeping giants. The sheer scale of them is almost impossible to comprehend. The largest, known as the Great Stelae, would have stood over 33 meters high and weighed more than 500 tons. It is the largest single piece of stone that humanity has ever attempted to erect. Even in its fallen, fractured state, it inspires a sense of profound awe. These stelae are not simple, unadorned pillars. They are intricate works of architecture, carved from a single solid piece of granite to mimic the appearance of a multi-storied building. Imagine the detail. Faintly, you can see the carved lines that represent floors, the meticulously rendered shapes of wooden support beams, and even the ghost of a false door at the base. At the very top, a semicircular feature is carved, perhaps intended to hold a metal insignia that would have flashed in the sun. They were designed to look like celestial skyscrapers, ethereal towers connecting the realm of the earth with the heavens above. The mystery begins with the very first step of their creation. How were they quarried? Imagine the scene at a distant granite quarry. Miles from the city, hundreds, perhaps thousands of workers toil under the hot sun. They are not using iron or steel tools, as we know them. With painstaking effort, they would have had to carve deep trenches into the solid bedrock around the desired block. Perhaps they used harder stones like dolerite to slowly pound and abrade the granite. Another theory suggests they cut slots into the rock, packed them with dry wood, and then poured water on them, the immense force of the swelling wood being enough to crack the stone along a desired line. Whatever the method, it would have required incredible patience, coordination, and a deep, intuitive understanding of geology. Once this colossal block of stone was freed from the earth, an even greater challenge presented itself: how to transport a 500-ton monolith across several miles of uneven, hilly terrain. The logistics are mind-boggling. There are no written records detailing the process, so we are left with educated speculation. Perhaps they used immense wooden sledges, placed on a series of rollers. It would have required thousands of people, and perhaps teams of animals like elephants or oxen, all pulling in perfect unison. They would have had to build ramps and level pathways, a massive infrastructure project in itself, just to move one stone. The sheer organizational effort, the ability to feed, house, and direct such a massive workforce, speaks of a highly centralized and powerful state, ruled by a king whose command was absolute. And then the final terrifying challenge: raising the stela into a vertical position. This was the moment of greatest risk. A slight miscalculation, a snapped rope, and the work of years could be undone in a catastrophic instant, the priceless monument shattering into pieces. Archaeologists believe they likely built a massive earth and stone ramp leading up to a pre-dug foundation pit. The base of the stela would be carefully positioned over the edge of the pit. Then, using a combination of ropes, levers, and sheer manpower, the great stone would be slowly, carefully tilted until gravity took over and the base slid down into its foundation. The sound of that colossal stone settling into its final resting place must have been a deafening roar, a moment of supreme triumph for the king and his people. Why did they go to such extraordinary lengths? These stelae were not built for practical purposes. They were markers for the tombs of the elite, particularly the kings and nobles of the pre-Christian era. Each stele was a monumental tombstone, a declaration of the power and prestige of the individual buried beneath it. But they were more than that. Their heavenward direction suggests a profound spiritual purpose. They were perhaps seen as conduits, spiritual antennae that connected the soul of the deceased ruler with the celestial realm, ensuring their smooth passage into the afterlife and their continued influence over the world of the living. They were stairways to the heavens, anchors of cosmic order, solidifying the king's divine right to rule. As Christianity took hold in Aksum, the tradition of erecting these massive funerary stelae seems to have ceased. The focus of monumental construction shifted from tombs to churches. The cross became the new symbol of connection between heaven and earth. And so the great stelae were left to the wind and the rain, their original purpose slowly fading from memory, becoming the enigmatic landmarks we see today. They stand as a silent, powerful testament to Aksum's earlier pagan golden age, a time of immense wealth, engineering genius, and a worldview that sought to carve its presence into the very fabric of the sky. As you rest, let the image of these great stone towers fill your mind, a symbol of humanity's eternal desire to reach beyond itself, to leave a mark that will outlast the ages. As our gaze gently lowers from the sky-piercing tips of the stelae, we are drawn to the earth beneath them, to the ground that holds the secrets these great stones were meant to guard. The stelae were the public declarations, the visible monuments to power and prestige, but their true purpose, their very reason for being, lay hidden deep underground. Beneath the main stelae field lies a royal necropolis, a city of the dead, a complex of tombs built to house the remains and earthly treasures of Aksum's ruling elite. It is here, in the quiet subterranean darkness, that we can find a more intimate connection to the lives and beliefs of these ancient people. Let's imagine ourselves joining the archaeologists who first began to uncover these hidden chambers. The work is slow and delicate, a patient conversation with the past. With soft brushes and careful hands, they sweep away the dust of centuries, revealing the entrance to a world that has been sealed for over a millennium and a half. A great stone slab is moved aside, and for the first time in ages, light penetrates the darkness. The air that escapes is cool and musty, carrying the scent of deep earth and the faint, ghostly trace of funerary offerings. It is a moment of profound reverence, a step across the threshold between the present and the distant past. The tombs themselves are masterpieces of stone construction. They are not simple pits in the ground. The most elaborate ones, like the so-called Tomb of the False Door, are multi-chambered structures, built from massive, perfectly dressed granite blocks. The precision of the stonework is astonishing. The blocks fit together so tightly that you couldn't slip a knife blade between them, all constructed without a speck of mortar. It's a kind of subterranean architecture that mirrors the quality of the stelae above ground, a testament to the skill of Aksumite masons and their deep reverence for their departed rulers. As we move deeper into the tomb, we see that it is designed to be a house for eternity. There are different chambers, perhaps one for the sarcophagus of the king, and others to hold the vast array of grave goods deemed necessary for the afterlife. This concept of burying the dead with their possessions is a belief shared by many ancient cultures, from the pharaohs of Egypt to the emperors of China. It speaks to a conviction that death is not an end, but a transition to another form of existence, a journey for which one must be well equipped. The tomb was the eternal palace, a place where the king's spirit, or Ka, could continue to enjoy the privileges and comforts of its earthly life. Unfortunately, like many of the world's great royal tombs, most of the Aksumite chambers were looted in antiquity. The immense wealth they once contained proved too great a temptation for later generations. We are left to imagine the treasures they once held based on the few fragments that remain. Picture the main burial chamber, as it was on the day it was sealed. A great stone sarcophagus would have stood in the center, perhaps containing the remains of the king, wrapped in fine linen and adorned with gold jewelry. Around it, the chamber would have been filled with the king's most prized possessions. There would have been stacks of exquisite glassware from Alexandria or Syria, their iridescent surfaces shimmering in the torchlight. There would have been ceramic vessels filled with wine, honey, and grain, sustenance for the long journey ahead. Chests of bronze and silver coins, piles of folded silk and cotton textiles, and perhaps even beautifully crafted furniture, inlaid with ivory and precious metals. Weapons too would have been included, a gilded spear, an iron sword in a decorated scabbard, symbols of the king's role as a warrior and protector of his people. These objects weren't just for show, they were believed to carry their essence into the afterlife, ensuring the king's status and comfort in the next world. The archaeological discoveries, though scant, have provided incredible insights. In one tomb, archaeologists found fragments of a beautiful ivory box, intricately carved. In others, they've unearthed Roman-style wine glasses, known as amphorae, confirming the extensive trade links with the Mediterranean. They found collections of Aksumite coins which helped to date the tombs and identify the rulers who might have been buried within them. Each tiny artifact is a clue, a piece of a grand puzzle that helps us reconstruct the world of the Aksumite elite. One of the most impressive tombs is known as the mausoleum. It is a large central structure with a series of smaller tombs radiating from it, suggesting a great king buried with his family or high-ranking court officials. The sheer scale and complexity of this complex indicate a highly stratified society, with a clear hierarchy that extended even into death. The king was at the center, the axis of the spiritual world, just as he was the center of the political world. His eternal rest was a matter of state importance, vital for the continued stability and prosperity of the kingdom. The practice of building these elaborate tombs, much like the stelae that marked them, waned with the arrival of Christianity. The new faith brought with it different burial customs and a different understanding of the afterlife. The focus shifted from material possessions to the salvation of the soul. Burials became simpler, more egalitarian, and the era of the great subterranean palaces for the dead came to an end. But the whispers from these chambers remain. They tell a story of a powerful, confident civilization with a deep belief in the continuity of life, a people who invested immense resources and incredible skill into ensuring that their kings would reign for all eternity in a silent, magnificent kingdom built beneath the earth. Having explored the monumental and the subterranean, let us now turn to something just as enduring, yet far more intricate, the world of language and writing. A civilization's true soul is often found in the words it uses, the stories it tells, and the script it develops to preserve its knowledge and faith. The Kingdom of Aksum was not just a power of stone and gold. It was a literate society, a culture that created one of Africa's most remarkable and long-lasting writing systems, the Ge'ez script. This unique alphabet became the vessel for their history, their religion, and their very identity. Imagine a scribe in a quiet room within a monastery or a royal palace in Aksum. The light from a small, high window illuminates the parchment stretched before him. He dips his reed pen into a pot of ink, a dark mixture of soot and gum Arabic. Then, with a steady, practiced hand, he begins to form the elegant, distinctive characters of the Ge'ez script. Each letter is a small work of art, a combination of a core consonant shape modified with subtle strokes and additions to denote a specific vowel sound. It's a beautifully efficient and systematic script, known as an abugida, where each character represents a consonant-vowel syllable. This script did not appear out of thin air. It evolved from the earlier writing systems of southern Arabia, the homeland of the Sabaean people who had migrated to the Ethiopian highlands centuries before. The earliest inscriptions from the Aksumite period are in this older Sabaean script, a system of consonants only, leaving the reader to supply the vowels. But sometime around the 4th century AD, a brilliant innovation occurred. Scribes, likely driven by the need to accurately record the holy scriptures of their new Christian faith, adapted the script, adding the vowel markers that made Ge'ez so unique. It was a revolution in literacy, making the written word more precise and less ambiguous. The sound of Ge'ez being spoken or chanted would have been sonorous and powerful. It is a Semitic language, related to Hebrew and Arabic, and its cadences would have filled the new churches and cathedrals being built across the kingdom. The Bible was one of the first and most important works to be translated into Ge'ez, an immense undertaking that required a whole class of dedicated scholars. This translation was not just a religious act, it was a profound act of cultural assertion. It meant that the Word of God could be read and understood in the language of the Aksumite people, without the need for Greek or Syriac intermediaries. It placed Aksum on an equal footing with the other great Christian centers of the world. Beyond the Bible, a rich body of literature began to develop in Ge'ez. Scribes recorded the chronicles of their kings, the Kebra Nagast, or Glory of Kings, being the most famous, although compiled in its final form much later. It drew on ancient Aksumite legends. They wrote hagiographies, the lives of saints, both local and universal, which provided moral and spiritual guidance to the people. They composed intricate religious poetry and hymns, theological treatises that explored the deepest mysteries of the Christian faith, and even scientific texts on subjects like astronomy and the calculation of the calendar. The monastery libraries of Aksum must have been repositories of immense knowledge, their shelves filled with handwritten manuscripts that were the kingdom's intellectual treasure. The inscriptions left by the kings are some of our most direct windows into the Aksumite mindset. The most famous of these belong to King Ezana, the ruler who converted the kingdom to Christianity. On a great stone monument, he had his victories recorded in 3 languages, Ge'ez, Sabaean, and Greek. This Rosetta Stone of Ethiopia allows us to see the king presenting himself to 3 different audiences. The Greek inscription was for the international community, the merchants and diplomats of the Hellenistic world. The Sabaean was for the people across the Red Sea in Arabia, with whom Aksum shared ancient cultural ties. And the Ge'ez was for his own people, a proud declaration in their own evolving language. In his earlier inscriptions, Ezana thanks the pagan gods of his ancestors, gods of war and the heavens. But in his later inscriptions, a profound shift occurs. He no longer speaks of multiple gods. Instead, he gives thanks to the Lord of heaven and earth, and later, explicitly to the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We can witness his personal and political conversion carved in stone for all time. It is a powerful and moving historical record, a king publicly announcing a transformation that would alter the destiny of his nation forever. The written word here is not just a record. It is an instrument of that very transformation. The Ge'ez script proved to be incredibly resilient. Even after the political decline of the city of Aksum, and as the Ge'ez language ceased to be spoken colloquially, it remained the sacred liturgical language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. It holds a place similar to that of Latin in the Roman Catholic Church. To this day, priests in Ethiopia chant the liturgy in this ancient tongue, and scholars study its vast literature. The script itself, with some modifications, evolved to write the modern languages of Ethiopia and Eritrea, including Amharic and Tigrinya. It is a living link to the ancient world, a continuous tradition of literacy stretching back more than 1,500 years. So, as we settle deeper into stillness, let's visualize those elegant carved words. See them etched in stone on a royal monument, painted in a holy book, or taught to a young novice in a quiet monastery. These characters are more than just an alphabet. They are the carriers of a culture, the guardians of a faith, and the enduring voice of a great African kingdom. They are proof that a civilization's greatest monuments are not always built of stone, but are sometimes woven from the delicate, yet incredibly strong, threads of language itself. Every great civilization has its foundational myth, a grand, sweeping story that explains its origins, justifies its power, and defines its place in the world. For Aksum and for the Ethiopian nation that would inherit its legacy, this story is one of the most romantic and enduring in history. It is the tale of the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon, a narrative that forges a direct link between the highlands of Africa and the sacred history of ancient Israel. This legend is more than just a folk tale. It is the cornerstone of Ethiopian identity, the source of the Solomonic dynasty's claim to legitimacy, and a story that has echoed through the centuries. Let's allow this ancient story to unfold in our minds, not as a dry historical account, but as the vibrant epic tale it is. Imagine, 1,000 years before the rise of Aksum's power, a wise and powerful queen ruling a rich kingdom in the south, a land of spices and gold. This is Makeda, the Queen of Sheba. In the Bible, her story is brief, a fleeting visit to the court of King Solomon in Jerusalem to test his famous wisdom. But in Ethiopian tradition, this visit is the pivotal moment in the nation's history. Picture her magnificent caravan arriving in Jerusalem, laden with unimaginable gifts of gold, gemstones, and rare spices. She is not a vassal coming to pay tribute, but a fellow sovereign, a powerful monarch in her own right, seeking to engage with a king whose fame has reached her distant land. She and Solomon spend days in conversation, a meeting of 2 of the ancient world's most brilliant minds. He is captivated by her beauty and intelligence, and she is astounded by his wisdom and the splendor of his court. The story, as told in the Ethiopian holy book, the Kebra Nagast, blossoms into a romance. When the time comes for Queen Makeda to return to her kingdom, she carries with her more than just memories of Solomon's wisdom. She is carrying his child. Back in her homeland, she gives birth to a son, whom she names Menelik, meaning son of the wise man. This child, the first emperor of Ethiopia, becomes the living embodiment of this sacred union, a bridge between Africa and the Holy Land. He is raised with tales of his father's greatness, and as a young man, he feels a powerful desire to travel to Jerusalem to meet the king he has never known. Imagine Menelik's own journey, retracing his mother's steps, arriving at the court of Solomon. The king is overjoyed to see his son, and recognizes him immediately. He honors him, teaches him, and begs him to stay and rule in Israel after him. But Menelik's heart belongs to his homeland, and he insists on returning. Solomon, seeing his son's determination, agrees. He decides that Menelik will not go back alone. He commands the high priest to anoint Menelik as the king of Ethiopia, and he decrees that the firstborn sons of all his highest nobles and priests must accompany Menelik back to Africa to help him establish a new kingdom modeled on the glories of Israel. This decision sets the stage for the story's most dramatic and sacred event. Among the young Israelite nobles who are to accompany Menelik is Azariah, the son of the high priest. As they prepare to depart, Azariah has a dream, which he interprets as a divine command from God. In the dead of night, he and his companions enter the Holy of Holies in Solomon's temple. There they take the most sacred object in all of Judaism, the Ark of the Covenant, the golden chest that holds the stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, given to Moses on Mount Sinai. They replace the real Ark with a replica and smuggle the sacred object out of Jerusalem. The caravan departs with Menelik and his companions, and unbeknownst to Menelik himself at first, the Ark of the Covenant. By the time Solomon discovers the theft, the caravan is long gone, protected, the story says, by the archangel Michael, who lifts them up and allows them to travel at miraculous speed. Solomon's pursuit is in vain. The Ark has left Israel and is now on its way to its new home, its chosen resting place, in the highlands of Ethiopia. This event is seen not as a theft, but as a divine transfer of God's favor, a sign that the covenant is now with the people of Ethiopia. This epic tale, the Kebra Nagast, became the national saga. It provided the Aksumite kings, and all subsequent Ethiopian emperors, with an impeccable lineage. They were not just ordinary rulers, they were descendants of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, the guardians of the Ark, and the leaders of God's new chosen people. This belief, known as the Solomonic ideology, was a source of immense strength and cohesion. It gave the kingdom a powerful sense of divine purpose and a unique identity as a bastion of Semitic, Judeo-Christian tradition in the heart of Africa. Whether the story is historically factual is, in many ways, beside the point. Its power lies in its truth as a foundational myth. It explains the ancient Semitic cultural and linguistic roots of the Ethiopian highlands. It provides a narrative framework for the kingdom's early adoption of a monotheistic faith, first Judaism in this story, and later Christianity. And it imbues the land itself with a profound and unique sanctity. As we rest here tonight, we can feel the deep, mythic resonance of this story, a tale of a queen's journey, a king's wisdom, and a sacred legacy that would forever define the soul of a nation. Flowing directly from the mythic shadow of a queen, we arrive at the heart of Ethiopia's sacred identity, a belief so profound and so closely guarded that it continues to mystify and fascinate the world to this day. It is the belief that the Ark of the Covenant, the holiest relic of the ancient Israelites, did not vanish from history, but was brought to Ethiopia by Menelik and resides there still. This isn't just a peripheral legend for the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, it is a central article of faith. The Kingdom of Aksum, in this tradition, became the final hallowed resting place for God's covenant with humanity. Let's gently explore this profound belief. The Ark of the Covenant, as described in the book of Exodus, was a chest made of acacia wood, overlaid with pure gold, and topped with 2 golden cherubim facing each other, their wings overshadowing a mercy seat. Inside it was said to hold the 2 stone tablets, on which the 10 Commandments were inscribed by the finger of God. It was not merely a container, it was believed to be the literal throne of the invisible God on earth. In battle, it was carried before the Israelite army, a terrifying and powerful weapon. In peacetime, it was housed in the Holy of Holies, first in the tabernacle and later in Solomon's temple, where only the high priest could enter, and only once a year on the Day of Atonement. The historical trail of the Ark grows cold after the construction of Solomon's temple. It is mentioned less and less in the biblical texts, and by the time the Babylonians destroy the temple in 587 BC, it has vanished entirely. This disappearance has spawned endless theories and searches, but for Ethiopians there is no mystery. The Ark was safely transported to their land centuries before the temple's destruction, a divine transfer of sacredness from one nation to another. According to the Kebra Nagast, its first resting place was on an island in Lake Tana, before it was eventually brought to the capital city of Aksum. Here, in the sacred heart of the kingdom, the belief holds that the Ark was housed in a special temple, a place of immense reverence. Its presence transformed Aksum from a mere political and commercial capital into the spiritual center of the nation, a new Jerusalem. The Ark was the ultimate symbol of God's presence and favor. Its guardianship was the most solemn duty of the Aksumite kings and the priesthood. It was the palladium of the state, the divine charter that guaranteed the kingdom's prosperity and survival. The belief in its presence would have permeated every aspect of Aksumite life, from the coronation of kings to the celebration of religious festivals. Today, tradition holds that the Ark of the Covenant resides in a small, unassuming chapel next to the Church of St. Mary of Zion in Aksum. This chapel is arguably one of the most protected and inaccessible places on earth. It is surrounded by a high iron fence, and no one is allowed to enter. No one, that is, except for one man, the guardian of the Ark. This guardian is a virgin monk, chosen for his piety by his predecessor. Once he enters the chapel, he never leaves it for the rest of his life. His sole purpose is to pray before the Ark, to burn incense, and to guard it with his very existence. When he is near death, he names his own successor, passing on the sacred duty from one generation to the next, in an unbroken chain that supposedly stretches back to Azariah, the priest's son who first brought it from Jerusalem. This intense secrecy is, of course, a source of endless speculation for outsiders. No scholar, no historian, no king or president has ever been allowed to see the object within the chapel. Its authenticity cannot be verified by any scientific or historical method. To the faithful, however, this is not a problem. The Ark's power is said to be so immense, so overwhelming, that to look upon it would be to die. Its holiness requires this level of protection. The secrecy is not to hide something, but to shield humanity from a power it cannot comprehend. Faith, not empirical proof, is the currency of this sacred tradition. Even if one cannot see the Ark itself, its presence is felt throughout Ethiopia. Every single one of the tens of thousands of churches in the country contains a replica of the Ark, known as a tablet. This tablet, a consecrated slab of wood or stone, rests on the altar in the church's own Holy of Holies. It is the tablet that gives the church its sanctity. Without it, the building is just a building. With it, it becomes a house of God. During major religious festivals, such as Timkat Epiphany, these tablets are paraded through the streets, wrapped in rich brocaded cloths, and carried on the heads of priests, while tens of thousands of faithful sing, chant, and celebrate. It is a vibrant, living tradition, a national expression of the belief that God's covenant resides with them. This belief, nurtured in Aksum, provided the kingdom with incredible resilience. It helped to unify a diverse population around a common sacred identity. It sustained the nation through periods of invasion, isolation, and hardship. The conviction that they were the guardians of the Ark of the Covenant gave the Ethiopian people a profound sense of purpose and destiny. As you rest in the quiet of this moment, consider the power of such a belief. Imagine a sacred object, hidden from view for millennia, its presence a constant silent hum beneath the surface of a nation's life, a whispered secret that has become the spiritual bedrock of a civilization. From the deep, ancient roots of the Solomonic myth and the guardianship of the Ark, our story now moves into the clear, documented light of history. In the 4th century AD, a profound transformation swept through the Aksumite kingdom, an event that would redefine its identity and set its course for the next 2 millennia. This was the adoption of Christianity. It wasn't a slow, gradual infiltration of a new idea, but a formal, top-down conversion initiated by the king himself. This decision would align Aksum with the great Christian empire of Rome, and forge a new spiritual identity that was both deeply international and uniquely African. To understand this momentous shift, let's travel back to the bustling Red Sea, to the trade routes that were Aksum's lifeblood. Ideas traveled along these routes just as surely as silk and spices. By the early 4th century, Christianity was a growing, vibrant force throughout the Eastern Roman Empire. Despite periods of intense persecution, Christian merchants, sailors, and travelers would have been a common sight in the port of Adulis, and their beliefs and stories would have undoubtedly trickled into the Aksumite consciousness. But the seeds of the kingdom's conversion were sown by an accident at sea. The story is told by the 4th century historian Rufinus. He recounts the tale of a Christian philosopher and merchant from Tyre named Meropius. On his return voyage from India, his ship stopped at a port on the Red Sea coast in Aksumite territory. A local dispute erupted. The treaty between Aksum and Rome was broken at that moment, and the people of the port massacred everyone on board the ship. Everyone, that is, except for 2 young boys who were traveling with Meropius, his kinsmen named Frumentius and Odysseus. The boys were found sitting under a tree, reading, and were spared. They were taken to the king of Aksum as captives. Imagine these 2 young boys, far from home, their lives shattered, now standing before the powerful African king. But the king, instead of enslaving them, was impressed by their intelligence and bearing. He made Odysseus his royal cupbearer, a position of trust. The elder boy, Frumentius, who was particularly sharp and prudent, was made the king's treasurer and secretary. He became a trusted advisor, essentially the prime minister of the kingdom. The 2 Syrian boys rose to the highest positions of power in a foreign land. During this time, they quietly nurtured their own Christian faith. Frumentius was a man of great foresight. He used his influence to seek out the few foreign Christian merchants living in Aksum and encouraged them to practice their faith openly. He helped them find places to gather for prayer and supported them in building small chapels. He was laying a gentle foundation, creating a small but visible Christian community right in the heart of the capital. He was a quiet missionary, winning respect and acceptance not through overt preaching, but through his wise governance and personal integrity. He was planting seeds of faith in the fertile ground of Aksum's cosmopolitan society. When the old king died, his son, Ezana, was still just an infant. The queen mother, who became regent, pleaded with Frumentius to stay and help her govern the kingdom and tutor the young prince until he came of age. For the next several years, Frumentius was the most powerful man in Aksum, shaping the mind and worldview of the future king. He would have taught the young Ezana about philosophy, about statecraft, and one can only imagine, about the tenets of his own Christian faith. He guided the kingdom with wisdom, and all the while, the Christian community was allowed to grow in peace. Once King Ezana was old enough to rule on his own, Odysseus chose to return home to Tyre. But Frumentius felt a higher calling. He believed that the seeds he had planted in Aksum were ready to blossom into a full harvest. He traveled to Alexandria in Egypt, which was then one of the most important centers of Christian thought in the world. There he sought out the great patriarch, Athanasius, a towering figure in early church history. Frumentius reported on the burgeoning Christian community in Aksum and urged Athanasius to send a bishop to lead and organize it. Athanasius, listening to Frumentius's incredible story and recognizing his wisdom and piety, had a different idea. He declared that there was no one more suitable for the job than Frumentius himself. And so, in that great council in Alexandria, Frumentius, the former captive boy, was consecrated as the first bishop of Aksum. He was given the title Abba Salama, which means Father of Peace. He then returned to the kingdom that had become his home, no longer as a royal secretary, but as the spiritual leader of its new official faith. His return marked the formal beginning of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. This story beautifully illustrates the character of Aksum's conversion. It was not brought by the sword of a conquering army, but by the quiet influence of a wise and faithful man who had earned the trust of the royal family. It was a conversion born of the kingdom's international connections and its openness to the wider world. The adoption of Christianity was a deliberate political and spiritual choice by a powerful, reigning monarch, a choice that would forever link the destiny of Ethiopia with the Christian world, creating a unique and enduring bastion of the faith in the heart of Africa. It was a new dawn for the kingdom, a light from the east that would illuminate its path for all the centuries to come. The story of a nation's conversion is often embodied in the story of one person, the pivotal figure who stands at the crossroads of history and makes a choice that changes everything. For Aksum, that figure was King Ezana. He was the Constantine of his people, the monarch who took the seeds of faith planted by his tutor, Frumentius, and allowed them to grow into the defining characteristic of his kingdom. His personal and public transformation is a remarkable story, one we can trace not only through legends, but through the hard evidence of stone and metal he left behind. Let's try to imagine the world as Ezana saw it. He was the ruler of a powerful, wealthy kingdom that sat at the intersection of several different worlds. To the north was the mighty Roman Empire, which, under Emperor Constantine the Great, had just recently embraced Christianity. To the east was Persia, a formidable rival with its own ancient Zoroastrian faith, and all around him were a tapestry of local African beliefs and the older pagan traditions of his own ancestors, who worshipped gods of the sun, moon, and war. Ezana was a thoughtful and strategic ruler, and he would have understood the geopolitical significance of all this. His early reign seems to have followed the traditions of his forefathers. His first military and building projects were likely dedicated to the old gods. We can see this on his early coins and inscriptions. As we pictured before, these artifacts proudly display the pre-Christian symbols of the disc and crescent, a clear continuation of the Sabaean religious heritage. His early royal titles proclaim his greatness in purely worldly terms, listing the many peoples he had conquered and the vast territories under his command. He was a successful warrior king in the classic Aksumite mold. But a profound change was taking place within him, influenced, no doubt, by the teachings of Frumentius during his childhood and the growing Christian community in his capital. The decision to convert was likely a complex one, a blend of sincere personal faith and shrewd political calculation. Spiritually, the Christian message of a single, all-powerful God, a God of justice and mercy, may have appealed to him more than the old pantheon. The idea of a universal faith that united people across ethnic and cultural lines would have been a powerful concept for the ruler of a diverse, multi-ethnic empire. Politically, adopting Christianity was a masterstroke. It immediately forged a powerful bond with the Roman Empire, Aksum's most important trading partner. By sharing a common faith with the Emperor Constantine, King Ezana elevated his kingdom's status from a mere commercial ally to a brother in Christ. This created a strategic ideological alliance of the two great Christian powers, one in the north and one in the south, standing against a Zoroastrian Persia and a largely pagan world. It was a way of modernizing his kingdom, of ensuring its place within the dominant cultural and political currents of the age. The most tangible evidence of Ezana's conversion is the famous Ezana stone, a magnificent granite monument inscribed with the story of his victories. As we touched on earlier, this stone tells two different stories. On one side, in an earlier inscription, he gives thanks for his military successes to the pagan gods, Estar, Beha, and Meda. But on the other side, commemorating a later campaign, the language is dramatically different. He attributes his victory not to the old gods, but to the might of the Lord of Heaven, who is victorious in heaven and on earth. It is a clear public renunciation of the old ways and an embrace of monotheism. His coinage tells the same story, but with an even more powerful symbol. One day, the artisans at the Royal Mint received a new command. The dies they had been using, the ones with the disc and crescent, were to be destroyed. New dies were to be carved, and on these new coins, for the first time in the kingdom's history, a cross was to appear, surrounding the king's portrait. This was a message that everyone, from the poorest farmer to the wealthiest foreign merchant, could understand. The cross, once a symbol of Roman punishment, was now the official emblem of two great empires. Ezana was proudly proclaiming his new identity, and the new identity of his kingdom on the most visible medium of all. The conversion of the king would have set in motion a wave of change throughout Aksumite society. The old temples dedicated to the pagan gods were likely abandoned or repurposed as churches. Frumentius, now Abba Salama, would have begun the immense task of organizing the new church, ordaining priests, and establishing monasteries. The work of translating the scriptures into Ge'ez would have accelerated, creating the foundations of Ethiopian Christian literature. The royal court itself would have been transformed, its rituals and ceremonies now infused with Christian symbolism and prayer. King Ezana's reign marks the great turning point in Aksumite history. He inherited a powerful pagan kingdom and bequeathed to his successors a Christian empire. His decision shaped the soul of his nation, creating a legacy of faith that has endured with remarkable tenacity for over 1,600 years. He was a king who stood between two ages, who looked to the future and chose a new path for his people. In the quiet of the Ethiopian highlands, his monuments and coins still whisper the story of this profound transformation, the story of the king who saw the power and the promise of the cross, and in embracing it, changed his world forever. With Aksum now firmly established as a Christian kingdom, its relationship with the wider world, and particularly with the Roman Empire, entered a new and deeper phase. This was no longer just a partnership based on the exchange of luxury goods. It was a fellowship of faith, a strategic alliance of two powerful Christian states in a world of shifting religious and political landscapes. The diplomatic relations between Aksum and the Roman Empire, which soon became the Byzantine Empire after the capital moved to Constantinople, were a cornerstone of Aksum's foreign policy and a key factor in its golden age. Let's imagine the scene of a Byzantine ambassador's arrival at the court of Aksum. After a long and arduous journey by sea and land, this envoy from the most powerful city on earth, Constantinople, finally reaches the highland capital. He is likely overwhelmed by what he sees. This is not some primitive backwater, but a thriving, sophisticated metropolis with towering stone monuments and a palpable sense of power and wealth. He is escorted to the royal palace, a grand structure built of stone and wood, where he is granted an audience with the Aksumite king, the Negus. The court ceremonies would have been designed to impress. The king, seated on a gilded throne, would be adorned in fine silks and gold jewelry. He would be flanked by his highest officials and military commanders. The meeting would be conducted with the help of interpreters, as the king would speak in Ge'ez and the ambassador in Greek or Latin. Gifts would be exchanged from the Byzantines, perhaps finely crafted silverware, religious icons, or a letter from the emperor himself, sealed with the imperial insignia. From the Aksumites, the gifts might include a young elephant, beautifully carved ivory, or sacks of the finest frankincense. This was the formal language of diplomacy, a carefully choreographed dance of mutual respect between two equal powers. This relationship was deeply practical. For the Byzantines, Aksum was an absolutely vital strategic partner. It controlled the southern gate of the Red Sea, the main artery for the hugely profitable trade with India and the East. An alliance with Aksum meant that this trade route was secure from pirates and, more importantly, that it bypassed the territory of their great rival, the Sasanian Persian Empire. The Byzantines and Persians were locked in a centuries-long struggle for dominance, and any alliance that weakened the Persians' economic and political power was of paramount importance to Constantinople. Aksum was Byzantium's key to the Indian Ocean. For Aksum, the benefits were equally significant. The alliance with the Byzantine Empire provided a measure of security. It meant that the most powerful military force in the world was a friend, not a foe. It guaranteed a stable and incredibly wealthy market for Aksum's exports of gold, ivory, and spices. This steady stream of revenue from the Byzantine trade funded the Aksumite state, paid its army, and financed the construction of the magnificent churches and monasteries that began to flourish after the conversion to Christianity. The relationship was symbiotic, a perfect alignment of economic and political interests. But the connection ran deeper than mere strategy and commerce. It was a bond of shared faith. The Patriarch of Alexandria, who had consecrated Frumentius, held authority over the new Ethiopian church. This meant that Aksum was part of the wider family of Orthodox Christianity, participating in the great theological debates that were shaping the faith in these early centuries. Aksumite pilgrims would have traveled to the holy sites in Jerusalem, Alexandria and Sinai, and Byzantine monks and missionaries may have found their way to the remote, peaceful monasteries of the Ethiopian highlands. There was an exchange of ideas, of religious texts, of artistic styles, and of holy relics. This is visible in the art and architecture of the period. The designs of some Aksumite churches show Byzantine influence, and the iconography of their religious art reflects the styles of the Eastern Mediterranean. The The gold coins of the Aksumite kings were often modeled on the Byzantine solidus, a clear nod to their powerful northern ally. This cultural exchange enriched both civilizations, creating a shared Christian aesthetic that spanned from the shores of the Mediterranean to the mountains of East Africa. A powerful example of this religio-political alliance in action was the joint effort to protect the Christians of southern Arabia. In the early 6th century, a Jewish king in Himyar, modern-day Yemen, named Du-Nuwas, began a brutal persecution of his Christian subjects, culminating in the massacre at Nadran. The news sent shockwaves through the Christian world. The Byzantine Emperor Justin I, unable to intervene directly due to the distances involved and his conflicts with Persia, turned to his ally across the Red Sea, the Aksumite king Caleb. He saw Caleb not just as a political partner, but as a fellow defender of the faith. As we've touched upon, King Caleb responded with overwhelming force. With Byzantine naval support, he launched a massive amphibious invasion of Yemen, defeated Du-Nuwas, and installed a Christian ruler in his place. For a time, Aksum became an imperial power, ruling a territory on the Arabian Peninsula. This was the zenith of Aksumite power, a moment when it acted in concert with the Byzantine Empire as a true superpower, shaping the destiny of an entire region. It was a handshake across the sea that had become a military embrace, a powerful demonstration of the strength of their Christian alliance. This golden age of diplomacy, trade and shared faith was the high watermark of Aksum's influence and prestige on the world stage. While we've been captivated by the grand narratives of kings, trade and religion, it's important to remember that the foundation of any great civilization is the earth beneath its feet and the food it produces. The magnificent stelae, the powerful navy, and the golden currency of Aksum were all sustained by a less glamorous but far more fundamental achievement: a highly sophisticated and sustainable system of agriculture, perfectly adapted to the challenging environment of the Ethiopian highlands. The true silent strength of Aksum was rooted in the skill of its farmers. Let's allow our minds to settle on the landscape of the highlands. This is not a land of broad, flat river valleys like Egypt or Mesopotamia. It is a dramatic, vertical world of steep mountains, deep gorges, and high-altitude plateaus, known as ambas. The soil is fertile, a gift of its volcanic origins, but it is vulnerable. During the rainy season, torrential downpours can wash away precious topsoil in devastating landslides, leaving behind barren rock. To thrive here, the people of Aksum had to learn to manage the land and the water with incredible ingenuity. Their solution was terracing. Imagine entire mountainsides sculpted into a series of giant verdant steps. For centuries, Aksumite farmers labored with simple tools, building stone retaining walls to create level plots of land. These terraces were a work of communal art, an architectural modification of the very landscape. They served several crucial purposes. First, they created flat ground for planting crops where none existed before, dramatically increasing the amount of arable land. Second, and most importantly, they were a brilliant system of water and soil conservation. Picture a heavy rainfall. On an unterraced slope, the water would rush downwards, gaining speed and power, scouring the soil and carving deep gullies. But on a terraced hillside, the story is completely different. As the water flows down, it is caught by the first terrace, its energy broken. It pools, spreads out, and soaks gently into the soil, irrigating the crops. The excess water then spills over to the terrace below, and the process repeats. By the time the water reaches the bottom of the mountain, its destructive power has been tamed, and the soil and moisture have been preserved on the slopes where they are needed most. It was a system that allowed for intensive farming while protecting the environment from erosion, a masterpiece of sustainable agriculture. On these man-made gardens, Aksumite farmers cultivated a unique and resilient set of crops, many of them native to the Ethiopian highlands and perfectly suited to the climate. The most important of these was teff, a tiny grain with a nutty flavor that is still the staple food of Ethiopia today, used to make the famous spongy flatbread called injera. They also grew wheat and barley, which were better suited to the cooler high altitudes, as well as various lentils, beans and peas. This diversity of crops provided a reliable food source and a nutritious diet for the kingdom's growing population. They also mastered the art of irrigation. In the drier valleys and plains, they built small dams and reservoirs to capture rainwater and river flow. They dug intricate networks of channels to divert this water to their fields, ensuring they could still produce a harvest even in years with less rainfall. This level of water management required sophisticated knowledge of engineering and a high degree of social organization to maintain the canals and ensure fair distribution of the water. It was this agricultural surplus, this ability to produce more food than the farmers themselves needed, that was the ultimate foundation of Aksum's power. This surplus fed the soldiers in the army, the sailors in the navy, the priests in the churches, and the thousands of laborers who quarried, transported, and erected the great stelae. It allowed a significant portion of the population to specialize in other trades, to become merchants, artisans, scribes, and government officials. It was the engine that powered the complex urban society of the capital. The wealth from the Red Sea trade was the glittering prize, but the quiet, patient work of the farmers on their terraced fields was what made the entire enterprise possible. The practice of farming was woven into the cultural and religious fabric of Aksumite life. The agricultural calendar, with its cycles of planting and harvesting, would have been marked by festivals and religious ceremonies, giving thanks to God for the fertility of the earth. The landscape itself, sculpted by generations of human hands, became a sacred testament to the covenant between the people and their land. The terraced mountains were not just a food source, they were a symbol of the order and stability that the kingdom had brought to a challenging world. As we rest here, let's picture that quiet, productive landscape. See the morning mist rising from the valleys, revealing the intricate patterns of the terraces climbing the mountainsides like green stairways. Hear the distant rhythmic sounds of farmers working their fields, their voices carrying on the clear, thin air. This is the silent, beating heart of the Aksumite kingdom. It's a reminder that the greatest empires are not built on gold and glory alone, but on the patient, sustainable, and intimate relationship between a people and the land that nourishes them. This deep connection to the earth was Aksum's most enduring strength. Every golden age has its twilight. For the Kingdom of Aksum, the centuries of prosperity, built on the twin pillars of international trade and fertile agriculture, were not to last forever. The world around Aksum was changing, and the intricate web of commerce that had brought it so much wealth began to fray. The decline was not a sudden collapse, but a slow, gradual fading, like the color draining from a magnificent tapestry. And one of the primary causes of this decline was the waning fortune of its greatest trading partner, the Roman Empire. Imagine those Roman ships we pictured earlier, their purple sails a proud symbol of imperial power and wealth as they docked in the port of Adulis. For centuries they had been a constant, reliable presence, but from the 5th century onwards, the Western Roman Empire was in a state of terminal decline, beset by internal strife and external invasions. While the Eastern Empire, Byzantium, remained strong for a time, the overall economic and political stability of the Mediterranean world was shattered. This had a direct and devastating impact on the demand for the luxury goods that Aksum exported. Think of it as a river beginning to dry up. The great markets of Rome, Gaul, and Hispania, which had once had an insatiable appetite for ivory, silks, and spices, were now consumed by war and economic hardship. Wealthy Roman elites who once spent lavishly on carved ivory furniture and precious incense for their temples were now struggling to defend their cities and hold their lands. The demand for luxury items, the lifeblood of Aksumite trade, plummeted. The purple sails appeared less and less frequently on the horizon of the Red Sea. This economic shock would have been felt throughout the Aksumite kingdom. The royal treasury, so dependent on taxes and tariffs from this trade, would have seen its revenues shrink dramatically. The kings of Aksum had less gold and silver to mint into coins, a fact that archaeologists can see in the debased quality of the currency from this later period. With less wealth, the state had less power. It became more difficult to fund the army, to maintain the navy, and to commission the grand construction projects that were the hallmark of the kingdom's golden age. The merchants and traders based in Adulis would have been the first to feel the chill. The bustling port, once a vibrant hub of international commerce, would have grown quieter. Fewer ships meant fewer deals, less work for the dock workers, and less business for the artisans and provisioners who served the maritime trade. A slow, creeping economic depression would have settled over the coastal regions. The intricate network of caravan routes leading to the interior would have also seen less traffic, affecting the communities and economies all along the way. Aksum's fortunes were further damaged by a series of environmental and health crises. The Justinianic plague, a devastating pandemic that swept through the Byzantine Empire in the mid-6th century, likely reached Aksum as well, traveling along the very trade routes that had once brought it prosperity. Such a plague would have decimated the population, disrupting agriculture and social order. There is also archaeological evidence to suggest a period of climate change in the region, with declining rainfall leading to environmental degradation. The carefully managed terraced farms would have come under immense strain, and the land may have become less productive, leading to food shortages. The kingdom, weakened by these internal and external pressures, began to look inward. Its connections to the Mediterranean world, once its greatest strength, were now a source of vulnerability. The kings of Aksum, perhaps seeing the writing on the wall, began to shift their political and economic focus away from the coast and deeper into the defensible, fertile highlands of the interior. This was a slow, strategic retreat from the international stage. The cosmopolitan, outward-looking character of the kingdom began to change, replaced by a more insular and agrarian focus. This period of decline was not a complete collapse, but a profound transformation. Aksum was adapting to a new reality. The world in which it had risen to prominence, the world of a unified Roman Mediterranean, was gone forever. The kingdom had to find a new way to survive. The fading of the purple sails was a poignant symbol of this change. Each ship that failed to arrive was another broken thread in the great tapestry of ancient world trade. For Aksum, it marked the end of an era, the beginning of a long twilight, and the start of a new chapter in which it would have to rely on its own internal resources and its deep well of cultural and religious strength to endure. As the familiar world of Roman trade and Christian alliance began to crumble, a new and dynamic force was rising from the deserts of Arabia, one that would irrevocably reshape the political and religious map of the world. This was the birth of Islam. The rapid expansion of the early Islamic caliphates in the 7th century was the final, decisive factor that severed Aksum's remaining ties to the Mediterranean and ushered in a long period of isolation. A crescent moon had risen on the horizon, and its gravitational pull would alter the tides of history for the Christian kingdom of the highlands. The initial relationship between the early Muslims and Aksum was, surprisingly, one of friendship and respect. The story of the first hijra, or migration, is a cherished tradition in Islam. In the very early days of his preaching in Mecca, the Prophet Muhammad and his small community of followers faced intense persecution. Fearing for their safety, he advised a group of them to seek refuge abroad. The land he recommended was Aksum, telling them that its king was a just and righteous Christian ruler under whom they would not be wronged. Imagine that small, frightened band of refugees making the perilous journey across the Red Sea. They were leaving their homes, their tribe, and everything they knew, placing their trust in the reputation of a foreign king who followed a different faith. When they arrived in Aksum, they were granted an audience with the king, the Negus. The leaders of Mecca sent their own envoys, demanding the extradition of the refugees. In a dramatic scene recounted in Islamic tradition, the Muslim refugees explained their new faith to the Christian king, reciting a passage from the Quran about Jesus and Mary. The king was so moved by the beauty of the words and their reverence for the prophets that he wept. He refused to hand over the refugees, granting them his protection. This act of compassion and tolerance created a deep well of goodwill between the nascent Islamic community and the Aksumite kingdom. The Prophet Muhammad is said to have declared that Abyssinia, Ethiopia, should be left in peace, as long as it did not act with aggression. This initial period of harmony, however, was not destined to last. As the Islamic faith grew into a powerful political and military empire, the strategic situation changed dramatically. Following the Prophet's death, the Arab armies surged out of Arabia with breathtaking speed. They conquered Syria, Palestine, and Egypt, the heartlands of the Byzantine East. Then they swept across North Africa, formerly a collection of Roman provinces. In just a few decades, the entire southern and eastern coastline of the Mediterranean Sea was under Muslim control. The sea that had once been a Roman lake, connecting Aksum to its Christian allies in Byzantium and Alexandria, was now largely dominated by a new power. This had profound consequences for Aksum. communication with the rest of the Christian world became difficult and dangerous. The Patriarch of Alexandria, the spiritual head of the Ethiopian Church, was now living in a city ruled by a Muslim caliph. The flow of pilgrims, monks, and ideas between Ethiopia and the wider Christian world slowed to a trickle. The economic impact was even more severe. The Islamic caliphates now controlled the major trade hubs of the Middle East, including the northern ports of the Red Sea. They built their own powerful navies and established a new dynamic trade network centered on cities like Baghdad and Cairo. While some trade with Aksum continued, the Christian kingdom was no longer the indispensable middleman it had once been. The Arabs could trade directly with India and the East, and Aksum found itself increasingly bypassed, its port of Adulis declining in importance. Sometime in the early 8th century, Adulis was destroyed, perhaps by a raid or an earthquake, and it was never rebuilt. Aksum's window to the world was slammed shut. The kingdom was now effectively an island of Christianity in a rapidly expanding sea of Islam. This isolation, while economically damaging, had a powerful effect on Aksum's cultural and religious development. Cut off from the theological debates and developments in Byzantium and Rome, the Ethiopian Church developed along its own unique trajectory. Its traditions, its liturgy, and its theology, which had their roots in the ancient Christianity of the 4th and 5th centuries, were preserved as if in a time capsule, sheltered by the mountain geography and the new political realities. This period of isolation forged the fiercely independent and distinctive character that defines Ethiopian Christianity to this day. The relationship with its Muslim neighbors was not always peaceful. There were periods of conflict and tension, particularly as Muslim sultanates began to establish themselves along the coast of the Horn of Africa. But the kingdom endured. It turned its back on the sea and focused its energy on the highlands. The crescent moon on the horizon was a symbol of a new world order, one in which Aksum was no longer a central player. The rise of Islam marked the final stage in Aksum's transition from an international maritime empire to a landlocked, isolated, and profoundly resilient feudal Christian kingdom. The story of Aksum now reaches its most enigmatic chapter. We have seen the kingdom's rise, its golden age, and the external pressures that led to its slow decline. But what happened to the great capital city itself? How did this bustling metropolis, this center of power, faith, and commerce, fade into the quiet provincial town it is today? The decline and eventual abandonment of the city of Aksum as the center of political power is a mystery, a quiet vanishing act, with few written records to guide us. We are left with the silent testimony of the stones and the whispers of archaeological clues. Let your mind drift back to the city of Aksum in its final centuries of prominence. The towering stelae are already ancient, their original meaning perhaps fading into legend. The great royal palaces and administrative buildings, once symbols of an empire's vibrant heart, are likely showing signs of neglect. The markets, once filled with goods from Rome and India, are now quieter, trading mostly in local produce and crafts. The city's pulse is slowing down, its rhythm becoming more pastoral, more attuned to the seasons of the highlands than the monsoons of the Indian Ocean. The reasons for this decline are complex, a convergence of the pressures we have already explored. The economic isolation caused by the rise of Islam and the collapse of the Red Sea trade was a critical blow. A city of Aksum's size and grandeur required immense wealth to sustain it, and that wealth was simply no longer flowing in. The royal court could no longer afford the pomp and circumstance of its glory days, and the urban population of merchants and artisans would have dwindled as economic opportunities vanished. Environmental factors likely played a major role as well. Centuries of intensive agriculture, deforestation to fuel the forges and feed the population, and possible overgrazing may have taken their toll on the surrounding landscape. The carefully maintained terraces may have fallen into disrepair as the central state weakened, leading to increased soil erosion. Archaeological evidence such as layers of sediment suggests that the region around Aksum became less able to support a large, concentrated urban population. The land itself, once the source of the kingdom's strength, may have been growing tired. This environmental and economic decline may have been exacerbated by political instability. As the king's wealth and power diminished, he would have had a harder time controlling the regional lords and nobles. The centralized power structure that had defined Aksum's golden age likely began to fracture, with power devolving to local chieftains in their mountain strongholds, or ambas. The kingdom was becoming more feudal, less unified. There are shadowy legends from this period of a mysterious non-Christian queen, known as Gudit or Yodit, who is said to have swept through the highlands, burning churches and laying waste to the old capital. While her historical reality is debated, the legend may be a folk memory of a period of intense internal conflict and the destruction of the old order. Faced with these mounting pressures, the rulers of Aksum made a pragmatic decision. They moved. The royal court, the center of political and military power, abandoned the city of Aksum and shifted southward into the more fertile and perhaps more easily defended regions of the central Ethiopian highlands, like the Lasta region. Aksum was never violently destroyed and forgotten like some ancient cities. Instead, it was slowly and deliberately deprioritized. It was like a great family home that becomes too expensive and difficult to maintain, so the family moves to a smaller, more practical house, leaving the old mansion to slowly fall into dignified decay. But Aksum was never fully abandoned. While the political power moved away, its spiritual power remained. It was still the sacred heart of Ethiopian Christianity. It was the site of the great church of St. Mary of Zion, the place where the Ark of the Covenant was believed to rest. It remained the place where new emperors would come to be crowned, a pilgrimage they had to make to connect with the kingdom's ancient glory and divine mandate. Aksum became a city of memory, a holy site, its magnificent ruins, a constant, poignant reminder of a lost golden age. The silence that fell over the city was not the silence of death, but the quiet of a place that has transitioned from the worldly to the sacred. The hustle and bustle of merchants and soldiers was replaced by the chanting of priests and the footfalls of pilgrims. The city's purpose changed from governing an empire to guarding its soul. And so, as you rest, picture this transformation. See the great city slowly emptying of its worldly ambitions, its stone monuments becoming less a symbol of a living king's power and more a testament to the enduring power of faith. The political kingdom of Aksum was fading, but its spiritual legacy was just beginning to take root in the sacred soil of its first and greatest city. Even as the physical city of Aksum faded as a political center, the idea of Aksum, its legacy and its sacred lineage, remained intensely powerful. The thread of its history was not broken. It was picked up and rewoven by a new line of rulers who would claim to be the direct heirs of Aksum's glory. This was the Solomonic dynasty, a line of emperors who asserted their legitimacy by tracing their ancestry directly back to King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba through the royal line of the Aksumite kings. This claim became the central organizing principle of the medieval Ethiopian state. After the political center of gravity shifted away from Aksum, a period of history known as the Zagwe dynasty came to power. The Zagwe kings were from a different ethnic group, the Agor people, and while they were devout Christians, indeed, they were responsible for the incredible rock-hewn churches of Lalibela. They were seen by some as not having the one essential qualification to rule, the sacred Solomonic bloodline. They were powerful and pious rulers, but in the eyes of the traditionalists they were placeholders, a temporary interruption in the true divinely ordained lineage. In the year 1270, this interruption came to an end. A powerful nobleman from the Amhara region named Yekuno Amlak led a successful rebellion against the last Zagwe king. But he did not justify his seizure of power through military might alone. His claim was one of restoration. He asserted that he was a direct descendant of the last Aksumite king, and therefore, he was the rightful heir to the throne of Solomon. He was not starting a new kingdom, he argued, but restoring the legitimate Solomonic dynasty that had been displaced centuries earlier. This masterstroke of political and religious propaganda was incredibly successful. With the restoration of the Solomonic line, the great national epic, the Kebra Nagast, Caesar, the Glory of Kings, was compiled in its final written form. This text, which we explored earlier, became the constitutional and spiritual charter of the new dynasty. It was a declaration to the world, and more importantly, to the Ethiopian people, that their rulers were not ordinary men. They were the descendants of a sacred union, the chosen guardians of the Ark of the Covenant, and the rulers of God's chosen nation. The emperor was not just a head of state, he was the elect of God, an almost priestly figure, who was the living link between his people and the divine. This ideology had profound practical effects. It gave the medieval Ethiopian empire immense stability and cohesion. The emperor's authority was not just political. It was a matter of religious orthodoxy. To rebel against a Solomonic emperor was not just treason, it was sacrilege. This deep-seated belief in the sacredness of the imperial line allowed the dynasty to endure for over 700 years, right up until the last emperor, Haile Selassie, was deposed in 1974. It is one of the longest-lasting dynasties in human history, and its longevity is a testament to the incredible power of the foundational myth inherited from Aksum. The Solomonic emperors consciously modeled themselves on their Aksumite predecessors. They saw themselves as continuing the mission of kings like Ezana and Caleb. They embraced the title Nagusa Nagast, King of Kings, an ancient title that echoed the imperial grandeur of Aksum. They acted as the supreme defenders of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, endowing monasteries, commissioning religious art, and leading their armies against rival powers who threatened their Christian kingdom. The memory of Aksum was a constant source of inspiration and a standard against which they measured their own reigns. This connection to the past was maintained through ritual. As we mentioned, even though the capital was now in other parts of the country, the city of Aksum remained the indispensable site for coronations. A new emperor's reign was not truly legitimate until he had made the long symbolic pilgrimage to the ancient city and been crowned within the precincts of the Church of St. Mary of Zion. This act ritually connected him to the entire line of kings, stretching back to Menelik IV. It was a physical and spiritual return to the source of his authority, a way of drawing power from the sacred history of the land. The thread of Solomon, therefore, was both a genealogical claim and a cultural and religious inheritance. It was a belief that Ethiopia had a unique and sacred destiny, a destiny that was first revealed in the time of Aksum. This belief fostered a powerful sense of national identity, one that was able to withstand centuries of isolation, internal conflict, and external threats. It was the invisible thread that bound the medieval empire to its ancient past, ensuring that even though the political center had moved, the spirit and the glory of Aksum would continue to define the soul of the nation. The legacy of Aksum was not just in its ruined palaces and stelae. It was alive and well, ruling from the throne of the Solomonic emperors. As Ethiopia, under its restored Solomonic dynasty, nurtured the legacy of Aksum in its highlands sanctuary, a strange and wonderful legend began to take root in a distant part of the world, medieval Europe. For centuries, Europeans, feeling besieged by the expansion of Islam, dreamed of a powerful Christian ally, a lost kingdom of immense wealth and piety, located somewhere in the mysterious East. This legendary king was known as Prester John, and for a long time, the fading memory of Christian Aksum became the focus of this desperate European hope. Let's drift into the mindset of a medieval European knight or monk. Their world felt small and precarious. To the south and east, the world was dominated by powerful Islamic empires. The Holy Land, the goal of the Crusaders, was firmly under Muslim control. They felt isolated, a beleaguered outpost of Christendom. In this atmosphere of anxiety and hope, a letter appeared in the 12th century, supposedly written by Prester John himself, and addressed to the Byzantine Emperor. The letter described a vast Christian kingdom in the Three Indies, a realm of incredible wonders. This kingdom, the letter claimed, was a veritable paradise on earth. It was crossed by a river that flowed with precious stones instead of water. The king's palace was a marvel of crystal and gold, and he ruled over 72 lesser kings. The kingdom contained no poverty, no theft, and no vice. It was home to fantastical creatures and the fabled fountain of youth. And most importantly, this king, Prester John, was a devout Christian, a priest king, hence the name Prester, from presbyter, or priest. And he was eager to march with his massive armies to the aid of his fellow Christians in Europe and help them reconquer the Holy Land. This letter was, of course, a masterful work of fiction, a forgery that perfectly captured the deepest hopes and anxieties of its time. But it was taken as gospel. For centuries, popes and kings in Europe sent out envoys and missionaries in a desperate search for this mythical kingdom. They first looked for it in Central Asia, then in India. But as travelers returned with no news, the focus of the search began to shift. The trickle of information that reached Europe about a long isolated Christian kingdom in the highlands of Ethiopia seemed to fit the legend perfectly. Here at last seemed to be the real kingdom of Prester John. The connection was not entirely baseless. The memory of Aksum, a powerful Christian ally of the old Roman Empire, had not vanished completely. It survived in fragmented historical accounts and church traditions. The story of King Caleb's invasion of Yemen, an African Christian king leading a massive army to defend the faith, sounded exactly like something Prester John would do. The medieval Ethiopians, with their claim to Solomonic descent and their guardianship of the Ark of the Covenant, possessed a spiritual prestige that fit the legendary priest-king. Ethiopia was a real, powerful, and ancient Christian kingdom, and it was easy for hopeful Europeans to project the fantastical details of the Prester John myth onto it. In the 14th and 15th centuries, as Portuguese explorers began to sail down the coast of Africa, the search for Prester John's kingdom became a primary objective. They were driven by a desire for trade and new sea routes to India, but they were also driven by this centuries-old crusading dream. If they could make contact with this mighty Christian king, they could form an alliance, a grand pincer movement that would encircle and defeat the Islamic powers of the Middle East. When the Portuguese finally made sustained contact with the Solomonic emperors of Ethiopia in the early 16th century, it was a moment of profound, if confusing, historical resonance. The Ethiopians had never heard of Prester John, but they were a powerful Christian kingdom, surrounded by Muslim rivals, and they were in need of allies. The Portuguese, for their part, were somewhat disappointed to find that the emperor's court was not made of crystal and gold, and there was no fountain of youth. But they had found something real and far more valuable, the Christian empire they had been dreaming of for 400 years. This contact had momentous consequences. The Portuguese provided the Ethiopian empire with firearms and military support, which proved decisive in helping it survive a devastating invasion from the neighboring Adal Sultanate. The dream of Prester John, in a way, became a self-fulfilling prophecy. The hope for a Christian ally led Europeans to find the real Christian kingdom of Ethiopia, and the subsequent alliance helped to ensure that kingdom's survival. This entire episode is a fascinating example of how history becomes myth, and how myth can in turn shape the course of history. The legend of Prester John was the faint, distorted echo of Aksum's glory, a memory that had traveled across centuries and continents, becoming embellished and fantastical along the way. It shows that even during its long period of isolation, Aksum was not entirely forgotten. Its legacy lived on, transformed into a dream in the mind of Europe, a dream of a powerful Christian king who was, in the end, found waiting in the timeless highlands of Ethiopia. While the Solomonic dynasty carried forward the political and genealogical legacy of Aksum, the kingdom's profound spiritual and artistic inheritance found its most breathtaking expression in a new holy city, a place that seems less built than miraculously revealed. This is the city of Lalibela. Here, during the Zagwe dynasty that briefly interrupted the Solomonic line, Aksum's tradition of monumental stone architecture was reborn in a startlingly original form. Churches that were not built up with blocks of stone, but carved down, hewn out of the solid living rock of the earth itself. Let your mind travel to this extraordinary place in the Lasta Mountains. There are no grand facades or towering spires visible as you approach. Instead, you are walking on a landscape of reddish volcanic tuff, and you suddenly find yourself looking down into a deep, shadowy courtyard. There, in the center of the pit, stands a magnificent church, complete and perfect in every detail, connected to the surrounding rock by only its base. It is a single monolithic sculpture, a work of negative architecture, where the builders did not add stone, but took it away. Imagine the process. It is an act of almost unimaginable faith and labor. The work would have begun at the top, on the surface of the rock. Priests would have blessed the site, and master craftsmen would have outlined the full dimensions of the church. Then, with simple hand tools, chisels, hammers, and picks, the workers would have begun the slow, painstaking process of trenching. They would have chipped away at the rock, creating deep, narrow canyons around the perimeter of the future church, slowly isolating a massive monolithic block. Every chip of stone had to be carried out of the deepening pit in baskets. Once this central block was isolated, the true artistry began. Working from the top down, the sculptors began to shape the exterior. They carved the sloping roof, the lines of the eaves, and the intricate patterns of the friezes. They then moved to the windows, chiseling out beautiful forms, some in the shape of Aksumite crosses, others with delicate mullions that mimic the wooden window frames of ancient Aksumite taluses. Finally, they would have reached the base, and the exterior of the church would stand free, a perfect building born from the heart of the mountain. But their work was not done. They then had to hollow out the interior. They would have tunneled in through the newly carved doors and windows, and begun the dark, difficult work of shaping the inside. In the dim, dusty light, they would have carved out the soaring arches, the massive pillars, the vaulted ceilings, and the sacred spaces of the nave and the sanctuary. Everything you see inside a church at Lalibela, the columns, the altar, the baptismal font, is part of the same single piece of stone as the walls and the roof. It is a staggering feat of three-dimensional planning, as a single mistake by a stonecutter could not be corrected. There are 11 of these incredible churches at Lalibela, connected by a labyrinth of underground tunnels and passageways, also carved from the rock. The most famous is Bet Georgis, the Church of St. George. It is in the shape of a perfect Greek cross, isolated in a deep pit, its roof adorned with a triple cross relief. To see it at dawn or dusk, when the soft light fills the courtyard and illuminates its warm reddish stone, is to witness something truly transcendent. It feels like a prayer made manifest in geology, a testament to a faith so profound it could move mountains, or rather, move rock from within them. What inspired such an undertaking? Tradition holds that King Lalibela, the Zagwe ruler for whom the city is named, was commanded by God in a dream to build a new Jerusalem in the highlands of Ethiopia. At the time, the original Jerusalem was under Muslim control, making pilgrimage difficult and dangerous for Ethiopian Christians. Lalibela was conceived as a substitute, a holy city in the heart of their own land. The site is filled with sacred geography that mimics the Holy Land. There is a trench named the River Jordan, and other features are named after sites in Jerusalem. But the artistic inspiration for these churches comes directly from Aksum. The architectural details, the window frames, the patterns of alternating, projecting and receding stonework, the way the support beams are rendered in stone, are all direct quotations from the great palaces and elite tombs of the Aksumite era. The builders of Lalibela were consciously looking back to the golden age of Aksum, drawing on its architectural vocabulary to create their new sacred city. It was a way of connecting their Zagwe dynasty to the deep, authentic roots of Ethiopian Christianity, a way of saying that they too were keepers of Aksum's sacred flame. The churches of Lalibela are the spiritual legacy of Aksum made tangible. They represent the culmination of a long tradition of Ethiopian stonework that began with the quarrying of the great stelae, but they also represent a transformation. The Aksumite impulse was to build upwards, to reach for the heavens with their towers. The impulse at Lalibela was to go downwards, to seek the divine within the earth, to create sanctuaries that were hidden, protected, and intimately connected to the land itself. As you rest, imagine the cool, silent interior of one of these rock-hewn churches, a space of profound peace, a miracle carved not just from stone, but from the very soul of a kingdom. Our long, quiet journey is drawing to a close. We have traveled the dusty trade routes, stood in the shadow of the great stelae, and descended into the rock-hewn sanctuaries of Lalibela. We have traced the story of the Kingdom of Aksum, from its glorious rise to its mysterious decline and its enduring legacy. And now, in our final moments together, let us rest our focus on the land itself, on the sacred geography that cradles all of these stories and continues to hold the spiritual essence of this forgotten empire. The Ethiopian highlands are not just a backdrop to this history, they are a central character in the story. The very landscape is imbued with a deep and abiding sanctity. It is a geography that has been shaped by faith, and which in turn has shaped the faith of its people. The mountains, the rivers, the caves, and the high plateaus are all woven into a sacred tapestry, a map of belief that has been overlaid onto the physical world. This sacred geography is perhaps Aksum's most intangible, yet most permanent, legacy. Think of the city of Aksum itself. It is not just an archaeological site, it is a living, breathing, holy place. For millions of Ethiopian Orthodox Christians, it is the center of the universe, their spiritual home. The belief that the Ark of the Covenant rests there transforms the entire area into a kind of extended Holy of Holies. The Church of St. Mary of Zion is its heart, but its sanctity radiates outwards, sanctifying the stelae fields, the tombs of the ancient kings, and the surrounding hills. To make a pilgrimage to Aksum is to walk on holy ground, to step into a landscape where the biblical past and the present moment coexist. This sense of a sacred landscape extends far beyond the capital. The remote monasteries, many of which were founded during the Aksumite period, are a key feature of this geography. They are often built in the most inaccessible and dramatic locations imaginable, perched on the edge of sheer cliffs, nestled on tiny islands in the middle of vast lakes, or hidden deep within remote mountain valleys. Places like Debri Damo, a monastery built on a flat-topped amber that can only be reached by climbing a 60-foot rope, were not chosen for convenience. They were chosen for their isolation, for their natural defensibility, and for their spiritual power. These monasteries became the bastions of Aksum's Christian faith during the long centuries of isolation. They were centers of learning, where scribes painstakingly copied the ancient Ches manuscripts. They were schools, where the clergy was trained, and they were spiritual powerhouses, where the constant rhythm of prayer and chanting was believed to uphold the cosmic order and protect the Christian kingdom from harm. The monks and hermits who inhabited these remote sanctuaries saw themselves as spiritual soldiers, their lives of ascetic devotion, a vital part of the nation's defense. The mountains became their fortress walls, and the caves their chapels. The land is also a repository of saints' tales. Every region, every mountain, every spring seems to have a story attached to it, a legend of a holy man or woman who lived there, performed miracles, and sanctified the place with their presence. These stories are passed down through generations, transforming the physical landscape into a narrative landscape, a place where every feature tells a part of the nation's spiritual history. To travel through the Ethiopian highlands is to travel through a living hagiography, a world where the sacred is not confined to church buildings, but is present in the very earth and sky. This profound connection between faith and land is what gave the inheritors of Aksum their incredible resilience. Their kingdom was not just a political entity, it was a sacred territory, a promised land given to them by God. This belief fostered a fierce independence and a determination to defend their faith and their homeland against all odds. When surrounded by hostile forces, they could retreat into their mountain fortresses, their ambas, and hold out, sustained by their faith and their deep knowledge of the land. The geography that isolated them also protected them. And so, as our journey ends, let us hold this final image in our minds. Picture the vast rolling landscape of the Ethiopian highlands under a canopy of brilliant stars. The great stelae of Aksum are silent silhouettes, pointing to a timeless heaven. The rock-hewn churches of Lalibela are sleeping in the heart of the earth, and in 1,000 remote monasteries, the faint glow of candlelight flickers as a lone monk keeps his vigil, his quiet prayers joining the ancient, whispering soul of the land. The political kingdom of Aksum may be lost to time, but its spirit endures, carved into the mountains, written in the sacred texts, and alive in the unwavering faith of its people. It is a legacy not of a forgotten empire, but of a kingdom whose soul became so intertwined with its sacred geography that it could never truly be lost.